Do you like fighters or spacecraft design? Grab your copy of the first Spacedock reference book all about these topics on our Patreon through the link in the description and pinned comment below. Hello everybody and welcome back to Spacedock, where we have the general sentiment that smaller spacecraft are better. Ships like Serenity, Normandy or the Millennium Falcon. These are the prototypical hero ship, with relatively few crew members who all know each other and have a great dynamic between them. But does that actually make a smaller ship better? First, what even counts as a small ship? In terms of having barely any crew, the Normandy that I just mentioned immediately disqualifies itself by virtue of having plenty of crew that you, as Shepard, never really interact with. This is especially noticeable in the first game, as even the focus characters, the squad mates and Joker and Chakwas, aren't that fleshed out. Tali and Liara are both pretty much just boring exposition dumps for their respective cultures, beyond their small parts in the main plot. That leaves almost all the other Alliance personnel on board as just generic nobodies who don't do anything of note. That largely continues in the sequels with the bigger, better SR2. Yes, the focus characters get significantly better in the sequels, but both incarnations of the SR2 still have numerous extra crew hanging around that are there but don't do much beyond spouting off exposition. So that's one ship that feels small but really isn't. What about the other way? Well, for that we have what replaced the perfectly good Razor Crest from the Mandalorian, which is barely big enough for one person to live out of. And then the N1 that Din Djarin got after the Razor Crest went kablooey is even smaller, but I ranted about that in this video here. Another element to this, albeit one that's from an in-universe standpoint, is that smaller ships with less crew are cheap. Frigates, corvettes, things of that sort of scale are going to be relatively inexpensive to build compared to the big girls of the fleet, like carriers or battleships, and even cheaper to run because of their small crews. This means they're going to be given some degree of latitude to do what they want, as the relevant admiralty isn't going to be breathing down their necks like they would for a huge warship. It's not got any spaceships in that I'm aware of, but Master and Commander shows this perfectly. HMS Surprise is given orders to intercept Acheron, but they are off by themselves on the other side of the world, so they can do this however they please. Is that really a small ship though, with all that crew and all those Marines aboard? What am I even waffling about this ship for if its crew is several times larger than what Shepard's stealthy interstellar tour bus has? Well, as the Normandy already proves, you don't need a small ship to have a small group of key characters to follow along on their adventures. It's entirely possible to have them just be part of a larger crew, and it's very common for parts of that group, or all of them, to be the command staff of the ship. That way they still have agency over what the ship does on a larger scale, but there's still loads of other people around the place for other stories to happen to, or to get blown up, or sucked into space, or have some other terrible calamity befall them, which is just something that cannot happen on a ship where the entire crew are the main characters. Having a whole bunch of other people around, and then killing them off, is a great way to show peril without actually putting the heroes themselves in harm's way. Unless they're leaving the show, of course. Smaller ships with smaller crew can kind of do this too, but it often just ends up with people getting constantly wounded instead, which can start to feel cheap if it goes on long enough. This is a problem that I'm sure Firefly would have suffered from sooner rather than later if it continued beyond that one season. To be fair though, there has been a trend in more modern shows to actually kill off major characters, so it's certainly possible for smaller crews to have this happen. Can't do that all the time though, like you can with the poor red shirts though, can you? It's a similar deal with ships being damaged. Something as large as the Galactica can take extensive amounts of damage, or even have entire parts of the ship be essentially inactive, but a smaller ship by necessity can only have small things damaged because they lack redundancy. This is kind of a moot point though, because the damage ends up being relative to ship size. You need to damage a big ship more for it to be narratively significant. Going back to crew, and another benefit of having extra people around is a lot of potential for recurring characters that are not main cast, but have likely been through the same things as them, with their own point of view of events. This is especially applicable to Battlestar Galactica, I think, with the minor characters aboard ship that pop in and out that we get to know, like the other Viper pilots or the random deck crew. This just isn't as possible with a teeny tiny crew, but it can be done by having a second place or a second ship the heroes meet up with frequently, like Tycho Station for the Rocinante or the USS Cayuga in Strange New Worlds, and that second one even has a large ship doing it. Speaking of Star Trek, it being one of the pinnacles of the genre really pokes a finger in the eye of the idea that small ships are better. Not that we know what a small ship is, but generally speaking, all of Trek's hero ships have been of decent size, with many crew wearing many red shirts. In fact, the only genuinely tiny ships have been La Sirena and the Protostar, both of which are fairly recent. Even the Defiant had random crew on. Despite that, people's favourite ships from Trek are typically one of the bigger ones, be it the Motion Picture Enterprise or the D or the E or whatever, because of their appearance or some emotional attachment to the media they were part of. And almost without fail, those ships all had ensemble casts that we came to know and love. This wasn't the case with every Trek hero ship though. As much as we like Discovery here on Spacedock, it has had a problem with focusing down further than other Treks by making Michael Burnham the main character. Yes, there's others who've had great stories, particularly Saru, but there's so many named characters who've been left by the wayside despite being potentially interesting, or the characters who've been around for years and are just glorified extras. That's a problem that is ship size agnostic though, but it would be a lot worse on a vessel that's only got a handful of crew. So what is the point of having a smaller craft at all if there's all these benefits to having a big one? Well, some of those large ship benefits are double-edged swords in that they can also end up making the vessel feel anonymous and flat. All those extra crew turn into white noise, blurring together into a big statistical blob that you just sort of shrug at. All those endless corridors, all those redressed sets standing in as other places. They can rob a ship of any personality just through sheer repetition. Compare that to Serenity, where every space is unique and customized and aged, which is possible to do because there's so few of them. Generally speaking, a ship being characterful is a whole other thing though, and comes down to way more than just size. Galactica is enormous and deeply characterful because of all her foibles, though it certainly helps that in the show she is unique outside of like one scene in Razor. Clearly, the idea that smaller ships are somehow more characterful is not a thing. In the end, whichever option is better really comes down to the preference of the creator and what exactly they are trying to create. Ships like Rocinante and Serenity went hand in hand with the stories they are set in and the characters that inhabit them. Rather than being better than something larger like the Enterprise or Galactica, they are simply different. Those bigger ships were made around telling the stories of the crew, and whether or not they are in the CIC or the lower decks, they're all part of a greater whole. In contrast, smaller ships tend to be filled with misfits who would be out of place in a ship's crew, though this is not a constant. The conclusion is a big old shrug. Is a smaller ship better? Well, it depends on the story being told. You can support Spacedock by joining our Patreon, where you can get our Spacefighter design reference book. Alternatively, you can support us directly through YouTube by giving us super thanks or by becoming a channel member. Thanks to our supporters, and thank you for watching.